Welcome to Beers with Contractors. We're cracking a cold one and taking a deep dive into the foundations of your business, pun intended, to unearth the strategies, techniques, and insider knowledge that can take your contracting business to the next level. So, grab your favorite beer, pull up a seat, and let's have a chat about the nuts and bolts of the construction industry.
All right, Dylan, you are back. How are you doing?
I'm back. I'm sorry I missed out. I feel like I left you hanging there.
We were way more efficient without you.
Oh, the podcast, yeah, it got better when I wasn't there.
There was never a bigger lie told. It took us forever to get set up. But Drake did a good job. Like, we had a great time with Brandon. So, how was your trip?
It was great, yeah. For any listeners out there that didn't know, I was in Colorado. My wife had a work trip. She's wrapping up work at an organization right now, and so we went and did kind of a closing retreat with that organization and had a great week. But it was the airport and some delays that made me miss a podcast last week. So sorry about that.
Air travel. Well, and also you got to walk, not the aisle like you're being married, you got to walk the stage and get another degree. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I last Saturday finished up a master's in human resources management through Wichita State. So I'm just excited to be done and have my evenings and weekends again. You know, it takes up a lot of time, but I'm grateful for the learning that was afforded. I will tell you a funny story. At the graduation ceremony, the degree was entirely online, which there's some major pros and cons of that I realize. But when I showed up on campus, it was only the third time that I'd been on campus in my entire degree, which is weird. The graduate school, I think, would fall apart if it wasn't for international students, because I kid you not, 95% of the people that walked in this ceremony were international students. And they literally had to have a computer read the names off of everyone because the names were from like all of these different countries, and every letter of the alphabet was used like over and over and over again. It was wild. So then the guy that was sitting next to me, he also is Caucasian, and so we were just having a good laugh. That it was refreshing when you heard like a John and you were like, oh yeah, John Smith, let's go. I can pronounce that name.
Yeah, there you go. Well, listen, to our 5 listeners, obviously Dylan leveled up in his education. Obviously you leveled up in your dress. Are you better than us now? You're clean shaven. You got, what is that? Salmon?
Salmon. It's a soft L. Salmon, maybe? I don't know.
I just picture that movie, Step Brothers, where they're in the job interview. But anyway, congrats. I know you've been working on that a while. So if any of our few listeners have any HR questions, you can get those answered for free.
It depends on the level of sophistication, but I'm happy to help out. So shoot me an email.
Yeah, well, you got the real world experience through our company. So congrats to you, buddy.
Thank you.
And on that note, I was just recently traveling, got waved down by a few people last week, actually. And this is going to dovetail into my topic today. But we joke around, 3, 4, 5 listeners. But we had a lot of folks in Philadelphia over the last few weeks. A few folks from Delaware, and also heard some folks from Minnesota and Wisconsin that are listeners of the show. So thank you guys. And I have been horrible. Let me try to channel my internal Minecraft playing teenager and say, hey, if you are listening to this show, please like and subscribe. It sounds so bad to say that because we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Gosh, I think we're on MySpace still. It's awesome. And so please do that because we do get your questions, which is fun. That's where we met Brandon Powell from last week. So I say that now because we're probably going to lose a few subscribers after I say this.
Oh, buddy.
So I got in a debate, and I say this nicely, but with a contractor last week about cash or accrual accounting. And that's where everybody turns the knob off. And I just want to say this clearly, and it's kind of like that meme that's on the internet, like, try to convince me that I'm wrong. And I'm very, very stoic about this, that if you are a contractor, specifically in the home services business, if you're not managing your books with accrual accounting, that's a big problem. And you need to do it. And I got in this debate. This person was cash accounting. We went back and forth. I know there's already going to be some hate comments coming from people about this, but I am just a big believer in accrual-based accounting, and if you're not accrual-based accounting, you need to fix that immediately. And I'll give you tons of resources for it.
So okay, hold up. Let's take a step back because I'm sure there's some people listening and they're like, "Well, what's the difference?" Can you just spell that out for us?
Yeah. So as contractors, and let me rewind a little bit. So the SBA says 47 or 48% businesses have failed within the first 5 years. Well, in construction business, it's 75%. So a lot of that is because not understanding books. When I say cash accounting, most people interpret that as cash management, meaning I got my bank statement, how much money went out the door, how much money did I bring in the door within a given month. And that's how they track their books. Completely legal. The IRS has some regulation around. And actually, insert disclaimer, I am not a CPA, but I'm practicing, and our guest today may be able to jump in on this. So, like managing all cash in and out, when you add the complexity of multiple projects, multiple payroll cycles, vendors, it gets incredibly complex, and this is where a lot of contractors lose their shirt. So accrual accounting is based on a few different things. It's based on, number one, balancing of the expenses and income, but also the date of the transaction, which then introduces somebody else's input, i.e. a receipt from your vendor, an invoice. And you know, we talk about this with payroll. So those two key differences, and you can have entire degrees on this, but one thing I always refer people to is just read the first chapter in Martin Holland's book, The Profit Problem, and it explains where double entry accounting, i.e. accrual accounting, came from. And it does it in such a simple way that will help save so much money and time and heartache for contractors in the future. And I get in this debate a lot, and I think the biggest problem is just not understanding it. And I was in the same shoes 10 plus years ago. I get it. So that's kind of the difference. Did I do a good enough job describing that?
Yeah.
Our guest today is going to tell me all the things I did wrong.
What's really funny is we didn't really plan for this topic, and then we realized the guest showed up and he actually came from accounting. So this is going to be fun from an accounting background. But I'll also add that, cash-based accounting, because of when you record the transaction, won't give you an immediate clear picture of your profitability of the month or quarter or whatever that you're trying to look at, because the transaction may have actually fallen inside or outside of the month you're wanting to look at. Whereas accrual is going to keep that transaction in its proper month. So if you want to know truly, was I profitable last month, you'll know that on accrual-based accounting much easier, much clearer than you would cash-based.
Yeah, let me just give a good example. This came up in this debate with this other contractor, which is somebody I appreciate, but why you need to understand accrual accounting. So the month of May, this individual, they paid their individuals on a weekly basis. They did not know that in May of 2024, they had 5 payroll periods. They were expecting, well, it's a month. We've got 4 payroll periods. So what happened is they did not account for 5 payroll periods in their cash accounting. And so let's break that down. So it's like, hey, here's our break even. We expect this much for payroll. Well, let's tack another week onto that. Accrual accounting would have helped balance this. And a good example would be the first week of May. Imagine the employees got their pay stubs on Friday, but Monday and Tuesday didn't fall into May. It fell into April. So cash accounting would allow those 2 days in April to be expensed in May, but accrual would have rewound that and billed Monday and Tuesday, April 29th and 30th, in the month of April, not the month of May. So sorry, I just lost a bunch of subscribers because of that. But like if your vendor would have billed you for expenses, like let's say you ordered a bunch of products and they said, hey, by the way, we're going to go ahead and invoice you for a bunch of stuff you got in April. You would go, whoa, time out. I need those broken up. You would do the same for payroll. Now, you don't do that for an employee, but you do accrue those expenses of April's expenses landing in April, not when it landed in your bank account or exited the bank account. So this is something that maybe, Dillon, you keep me straight here. I'm passionate about it. I love it. I think it's the way that contractors should do business. Maybe I'm just not doing a good way of explaining it. I'm not as diplomatic as some people.
Hey, it's all right. Yeah, I think this something, if you don't even realize there's a different way to do your accounting, then there might be a problem. Like you at least need to know there are 2 different kind of tried and true ways. And accrual-based accounting, to be fair, is the preferred way for like large businesses. Like the IRS expects it once you get to a certain threshold. If you're going to be like a publicly traded company, you have to be accrual accounting. So there is some more sophistication that comes, and oftentimes you have to pay someone to do that sophistication for you. because we're not accountants. Will and I are not accountants.
We just play them on TV, right?
Yeah, we like to act like we are, you know. But speaking of that, I think this is a good segue to our accountant friend who's not really doing accounting work anymore.
Yeah, the best ones are the accountants that don't do accounting anymore.
Yeah, we love them.
Have you ever been to an accounting conference, Dylan?
No, I haven't.
It's crazy. They are wild. So anyway, yeah.
Why were you at one?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to know how the party was, and then that was the scene set for The Hangover 3. Well, no, it wasn't. But anyway, accountants can party. You got to watch them. So, all right, the good segue. So our guest today, I'm excited, Dylan. I mean, we during our show prep today, we were just pumped about this. So our guest today started as an accountant with KPMG. That's so funny. Then said to hell with it, and then went to join the Peace Corps for 2 years. So later became a self-taught design professional. Then went all the way down to the bottom, became a Masonry apprentice. Now, don't worry, there's good stuff coming, Dylan. So later went on to open his own practice called Building Culture. And did you see how many followers they have on YouTube?
How many?
11,500 as of today. Subscribers. Just they build houses. This is awesome. So, started that in 2007. Since then has received an Urban Guild Award, an ICAA Award for Emerging Excellence, and been behind over 15 million in design and projects since 2017. Today, good friend of mine, Austin Tunnell, of Building Culture. Welcome to Beers with Contractors, buddy.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and you got Liquid Death today.
It's not. I actually like beer, but I'm 35, and I just find that I have like 2 beers, and I can't sleep as well, so I just limit it more than I used to do.
Dylan and I will take your share. You're good.
Yep, that's all right. Yep, more for me.
Well, Austin, we've known each other a while. Like you're known around the country for like this unique kind of approach to building. And I think it's true. We talk a lot about purpose with people, but you bring so much purpose to first your business model first, which I appreciate. But let's just take a deep dive. I always do this with every guest. Like, how the hell did you end up here? Obviously, starting in accounting and then moving on to the Peace Corps. Yeah, I mean, how many places did you get fired from? No, I'm joking. But yeah, Austin, take us through the history, man.
Now, I started off the main thing I learned while being an accountant, and I got my CPA, and I only did it for 15 months, is that a piece of paper doesn't mean you know anything. I passed the test, but you wouldn't have wanted me doing your taxes or something. But no, so I started off in Houston, grew up in Houston, and just followed my dad's footsteps to become an accountant because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was kind of like that practical thing. I could make a good living, all that. And so I had money. I mean, you make decent money at that time. 2011, I was making 60-something K out of college. Not bad, with benefits and no student debt and stability and, trying to do all those things. I was going to church and then trying to find hobbies and trying to find a girlfriend. And I was absolutely miserable, even though on paper, everything should have been pretty perfect, living in a cool part of town. And, the whole time I was like, I thought this is the part God's supposed to fix. But it turned out to be the greatest. I am so glad that the misery was so intense because while it still took courage to leave, when you kind of leave everything behind, when you're that miserable, you kind of don't have anything to lose, when you can't get up off the couch on a Sunday because you're just I just can't feel a purpose to life at all. And so I started thinking about what do I want to do that. And then the funny thing looking back is I've never really known what I wanted to do. I never really asked that question. And so I started asking that question, what do I really want to do? And I was Googling cool jobs, ended up finding the Peace Corps. I was like, well, that sounds really cool. That sounds meaningful. You don't get paid, but I don't care about that. So with about 20K in my bank account, I sold my car, got rid of anything. But before the Peace Corps, I moved to Panama, which is like I mentioned right before we hopped on. Learned 2 things in Panama while I was there for a few months. Got introduced to traditional design, and I had grown up in the suburbs of Houston. So the juxtaposition of growing up in the suburbs of Houston and endless suburban sprawl and franchises and corporate, all this, and then suddenly doing Panama and learning this other stuff, you're kind of like, wow. And then I also met the man that would later, a few years later, teach me how to lay brick, which is kind of cool. So it's kind of, I like to say that the universe or God or whatever you want to think about it can reward people that will take the leap to, off into the unknown. Because if you don't go into the unknown, you'll never find out. It's on the other side.
Yeah, that's cool. So after that, first off, what an inspiring story of just like, yep, I'm leaving cool jobs. There was a Tom Hanks movie, I think, based on this. Like, actually, I think in that movie he was chasing a girl to the Peace Corps, then got dropped off in the middle of nowhere. But, we hear this saying, like, when the student is ready, the master will reveal himself, right? And then all of a sudden, somebody teaches you about masonry and the design stuff. So you brought that back home and started this awesome company. I'm so jealous about the concept. I mean, our listeners know I'm in foundation repair. It's not sexy, but your work is sexy in the right sense of meaning it looks beautiful, but it's also sustainable and all that. So where was the light bulb moment there where it's like, this is what I'm going to do in 2017 with building culture?
Oh yeah, that's a good point, because I went off to the Peace Corps after that for 2 years thinking like, I'm going to go to the Foreign Service, the UN, something. And immediately was like, well, it was a great experience, but also like, I hate bureaucracy. And you can't, like, what KPMG corporate bureaucracy, and then you've got like government nonprofit bureaucracy, and it's like, oh God, so it was nice to learn what I didn't want to do, along with finding out what I do want to do. And, I always, because I had a financial mindset, I was like, I want to be a developer, a real estate developer, because that's the person that really controls what gets built. If you want to change what gets built, you need to be a developer. Those are the people that buy the land, raise the money, control the dollars. But at the same time, I was like, I don't want to be a developer from a spreadsheet, only from a spreadsheet. I understand spreadsheets. I actually quite appreciate spreadsheets. I appreciate double entry accounting. It's actually kind of beautiful in its own way, but I wanted to start from the ground and like learn how to lay the bricks and the sticks. And so I'm just so lucky that I had met this man, because he was pretty singular. And when I got back, I said, can I come work for you? And that's how I ended up in Oklahoma, because he had just moved to Carlton Landing in Oklahoma. He's from Georgia. So I moved down there. I had a 5-week engagement, moved down there, laid brick for 2 years, making $12 an hour. And it was really over that time that I was just fully enmeshed in the trades. At that point when I started, I didn't think I had an artistic bone in my body. Like, didn't grow up drawing, nothing like that,
And by the way, Austin, thank you for saying that, because I think that's not introduced a lot in the messaging about careers in the trades. That's one of the things I love about it. Is I got started in this doing furniture and cabinet making, and it is an expression, like an artful expression, to be able to create something.
Yes.
And so that is so cool to think like brick and masonry. Yeah. Wait, it could be artistic?
Unbelievably so. And that's what's amazing is I think, when you're talking about coming from a contractor base, you're talking about someone who understands the medium. So I was understanding the medium, and then as I was teaching myself design, I was freaking out of like, how am I going to provide for my family after this? No one else can build brick houses, so I'm going to have to build it. I can't I'm not going to know how to read plans from someone else, so like I need to figure out how to really design and build it myself. So then I started designing really simple things that I knew how to build. Those simple things were, guess what? Rectangles. And you would think that is a dark art today, because no one just builds a simple rectangle anymore. Like if you just go out in the suburban subdivision, I mean, you'll have like 5 gables and 10 hips and, whatever on these houses, and it's all cut up. I'm just like, build a dang rectangle. That is a building block of something beautiful. And then the second part of learning design was just literally looking at things I found beautiful. So just whether I was walking around or traveling or just on Instagram or whatever, it doesn't matter, Pinterest, just saving things I found beautiful and looking at them and realizing that was such a better education than going to architecture school, like in so many ways. Now, there's some great architecture schools in the country, but I just mean, what is beautiful? How is it beautiful? Why is it beautiful? And then figuring out how to replicate that from a place of understanding the medium itself. And it turned out I stumbled into, accidentally, the best education I could have possibly asked for.
And sorry, Dylan, I know you have a question. A lot of folks, they think of design and they want to go bold. They want to go wild. And you have just inspired from traditional elements that, in my opinion, are timeless and are just gorgeous to look at. So I love this concept of a rectangle. Like Steve Jobs said, simplicity is the ultimate in sophistication, right? And I have seen your work, and I'm not going to say you have a Mona Lisa yet, but there's one coming. But like at Carlton Landing, you have this one area, it's a brick courtyard, right? And sorry if I'm, actually describe it to me.
It's a pocket neighborhood. We bought 3 lots, split it up into 6, and then did this U shape of house around it. In the middle of it has this moon gate, and a moon gate being like this brick gate, this kind of round gate. So not just an arch, this round kind of like portal.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It was just one of those things I saw. I was like, we need to do that. And it was like halfway designed, and then you just kind of figure out as you're building the formwork and scratch your head and you're like, well, then how high does it need to be? And how do I, but then it allows that creativity in the field. And this is something that sticks with me today because that was 2017, but this idea of, you have to know certain things going into a project. You can't just like go in blind. You got to get permits. You have to understand you've got budgets and things. But this idea of letting the story unfold rather than like, let me come up with every little detail and then impose that thing on the world. It's like, let me come up with what I need to come up with and then start building it and then respond to it. And I compare it to authors. I'm not an author, but like you hear them talk about, they come up with a character and then the character starts to write themselves a little bit. And so I think there's something really beautiful about letting something breathe. And that time is actually an essential element, I think, in creating something really wonderful. And we don't appreciate that much because we're in such a hurry for a lot of reasons that we don't really produce any great works of art. Like, is there anything we're building today that in 500 years, one, is going to be around, and two, I would wager no.
I think what's so cool about your work in building culture is that it's sustainability and like longevity is a core component of what you want to build. You're not building something that's going to be torn down in 20 years. And I think that a lot of builders or just a lot of businesses in general will do work and it's like, hey, how can I make a buck today? And I don't really care what happens to it tomorrow. And so that longevity is obviously like a core principle of the kind of work that you want to do. And the ideas, the principles that we have in business obviously inform the way that we work. Would you mind sharing with us, like what other kind of principles or beliefs that you have that sort of impact the way that you design and build?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I like to bring it back to the why of like, why do we build? Like, why do we build anything, not just me? Well, I guess, I had to answer that question for building culture. It's not to increase GDP or how many housing starts or how many millions of dollars or whatever. It's really the purpose of architecture and the purpose of building is to facilitate human flourishing. And I think that was the why when we were creating places like Florence and some of these cities that have persisted for centuries, that people will spend billions of dollars just to go visit for a week to experience it. And they come home and just accept the world around it as it is. And I'm going, it doesn't have to be this way. We're the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And look at what we build. You wouldn't think it if you go outside and look outside the window of what we're building. And so this idea of facilitating human flourishing being kind of the foundational why, and then everything comes from that. And so even sustainability, like I really care about sustainability. I really care about environmentalism and things like that. But also that is under the umbrella of human flourishing. It's like human flourishing first, and these things support that. And the reason I bring that up is because so much of architecture today, I think people are struggling to find a why. And so much of it comes down to climate change now. Like, that's the thing. It's like if someone's trying to attach a higher purpose to it, it's like climate change. So to stop the climate from changing, well, and you're like, I'm not saying there's not nobility in that, but that cannot be a sustaining why. Because it's like, if that was really the purpose, you wouldn't build anything at all. I can tell you how to build a sustainable house. Don't put any windows in it. Don't put any openings in it. I mean, then you don't have a
Concrete box.
Exactly. And then the other piece of it too is beauty is so critical. I don't think beauty is like optional. In today's world, beauty is kind of like, it's all subjective. And I don't mean there's not a complex conversation about beauty and that there's objective beauty and subjective beauty. Yes, of course, but it's both. At the same time, like 90% of people can agree on what's beautiful, whether it's a beautiful person or a beautiful building or a beautiful song. And I think it's actually essential to the human spirit to be building. It reminds us of, because something I've learned, you've got your shoulder banged up. I was in a wreck and can't really walk very well anymore. And in that helped me kind of see a little bit more just of how complex humans are, and that the world is hard. Like, building culture has been the hardest thing I've ever done. But that's where the meaning is too. And I think like beauty can help us. It's almost like a subliminal moment that lets us see past into something more meaningful. And I think those are like critical. I think that's critical for us.
Well, there's like 3 or 4 things that I want to take deep dives in. And I'm love hearing this because, well, actually, this is a great kind of pivot point, because I've spoken with a few developers knowing that I'd have you here, and I admire your work so much, Austin. But the fact is as a developer, you get to see it from the 10,000 foot view, and you got to make it work. And then I hear guys guys and gals, sorry, being like, oh, you can't compete in the marketplace with all of these niche approaches to building. But you have done it successfully. So how do you do that? What do you say to those people in the world that say, no, this can be done? And not to mention, you can create these staples that will become the historic neighborhoods in your city or community 50 years from now. They just don't realize it yet.
I would say my success is varied, like I've almost gone bankrupt once during COVID. That wasn't totally my fault.
Oh, Dylan's gone bankrupt 3 times since this podcast. He's got kids on the way.
I still have beer. They can't take my beer.
In a lot of ways, they're right, but that's because they're playing that game. And once you just say, like, I'm going to play that game, you have to play with those rules. And I'm less idealistic than I used to be of understanding, like, there's this balance, but, like, my goal is to work outside of the rules. And so much of it is driven by finance and the way capital works in this country, particularly since the 1970s. And this whole idea that you need 15% plus IRRs and a 5 to 7 year exit. You cannot get those kind of returns in a 5 to 7 year exit and not be extractionist. And I think, like, so much of our capitalist economy, like, people blame capitalism. Like, I would assume all of us in this room, being small business owners and stuff, are quite pro-capitalist, right? Like, I very much am. And at the same time, I see so much damage being done. But I would actually say that's not true capitalism, it's extractionism. Because capitalism should be providing the most benefit, for all people. But when you make it only about this short-term financial interest, and then you get to take that profit and leave and never have to live with, the consequences of that building. And of course, as capital gets concentrated and you've got institutional investors across the country and they're just scouring the country for the next place to put their multifamily apartment building. And once again, I'm not really like blaming these. It's not like people are like individuals are bad because they're doing this. It's really how the system works. I'm just saying I'm not going to work in that system. And if you're making a decision of what's going to go in Tennessee and we're sitting here in Oklahoma City, can you really care about what's going in Tennessee, and this neighborhood you don't care about that's a line item on a spreadsheet? You can't really care. By the time you get your profits out of it and that building, the buildings are Class A for like 10 to 15 years, and then they lose their Class A status. For someone else to kind of buy it, put some lipstick on it, extract a little more profit out of it, raise the rents a little bit, hold it for 7 years, do it over and over again. 50 years ago, just 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago, we were building things. The developer would build it and hold on to it indefinitely. There wasn't an exit plan. It's let's build something great that's going to last, and we're going to rent it out, and we're going to hold on to it, and we're going to steward it well. And I follow some people that I'm getting really inspired by, like a Moses Kagan. He's on Twitter. I'm finding Twitter is a great place for real estate. It's just really odd. I never knew that. He's out in LA. He's got $200 million of assets under management. And I'm going to not repeat it quite right, but his kind of philosophy is buy quality real estate in quality areas, steward them well, hold indefinitely. And he's raised money to be able to do this over and over and over again. And I hopped on one of his calls, and they didn't even mention IRR. That was in the deck and stuff. It was a 30-minute investor call. They didn't even mention IRR because it's like you can't actually predict it. The market can crash, interest rates can go up 2%, your project can be delayed 12 months, and that pro forma is toast.
So, like, let's talk about the moon door, right? Moon door?
Yep. Moongate is what I call it.
Moongate, yeah. So, by the way, people need to search that on Instagram. Go to Austin's Instagram page and search this because it's popular. And number one, you built that to be sustainable. And how many weddings and prom pictures, just family gatherings. This thing is like a sight to be seen, and everybody wants their picture next to it. So talk about purpose back to the builder. Like, everybody wants to badmouth the production builder, right? Like, yeah, they did a crappy job, And of course, when you're building neighborhoods across the country, you're not in contact with the local community, which you've done a good job. One of the big light bulb moments that I ever heard from you was this concept of cost of ownership. Do you want to pay it now, or do you want to pay it in the long term? So you bring the art side of it, and I think we've been art biased in our conversation now, but this is huge because it's like this old world concept of your design and architecture is actually proven to show in the long term, this structure will cost you less. And this is something huge and powerful. So Like, talk more about that, because our listeners are not kind of savvy to that, but that was my light bulb moment when I heard you say that on one of your messages or blogs.
There's two things I'll say about that, because there's at the individual level and there's also at the societal level. I know you guys understand, but a lot of people misunderstand that like wealth and money are not the same thing. You know, money is an exchange and how you exchange wealth. But, so money is limited. Wealth is infinite, how I think about it. And when you have a disposable architecture, and what I mean by that is buildings that get thrown away every 75 years. And by the way, you need some of that building. Like every great society has fast and cheap housing. You need that to create new great places. So all places start. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be that. I'm just saying not everything should be that form. But you cannot actually build wealth as a country, like literally as America, if our architecture and our infrastructure is literally being recycled every 75 years. That money just keeps going back into it to rebuild the same thing over and over again. When you can build the Florence once and 500 years later, it's still, there. So there's that about building societal wealth. And then at the individual level, like you're absolutely right, that the way we build today is very expensive. And like you're going to pay for it. The thing is, because people move so often, oftentimes it's not that individual that pays for it.
Oh, they're transferring the repair. Hey, by the way, I'm the repair guy, right? So it's like don't listen to Austin because I don't want you to be building houses. No, it's not that way. It's like it all comes around. There has to be repairs to any structure, but like this is bleeding the working class people dry by having structures that are cheap up front but costing them an arm and a leg down the road due to repair and just cost of living expenses.
I just got a quote. Well, we got a 2,000 square foot house, a 100-year-old historic house here, and HVAC's about to go out. I got a quote on it. Now, granted, this is not because of the quality of the house, per se, but and granted, all new ductwork and stuff, $45,000. I hadn't got a new HVAC unit quoted in a while, and I was just like, and granted, repairs more, or retrofits more expensive than new construction. But it just reminds me of the thing that I say a lot is people can't actually afford the houses that they live in. And I don't say that to be mean. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think we should build better but smaller. And it's not because I think everyone should just live in tiny places, whatever. I actually mean that in the sense that even though someone might be able to afford to pay for that house on a 30-year mortgage today, in 15 years when the repairs start coming in, when the $45,000 HVAC bill comes in, can you afford it? And by the way, no, you probably can't. So you're probably going to sell it, and then someone else is going to buy it. Your house is appreciated, some of them, they're going to be stuck with it. I really think that a lot of the suburbs built today will end up being slums in 50 years because of the way the incentives are set up. If every house is about $200 a square foot in that suburban subdivision, you can't really truly maintain your house to what it really needs to be because the people next to you probably aren't. And if you can't upgrade your kitchen because then your house would be X about more per foot. So then when the bills start coming due, what do? If you're actually smart, you sell and you go to a new place. And then like people with fewer resources and fewer options move in. Property taxes don't cover the infrastructure. Infrastructure starts going down. Houses around start going down. It doesn't make sense for anyone because of the way comps work to maintain their houses and how isolated all the houses in this subdivision are $200,000. All the houses in this subdivision are $500,000. We have a very non-dynamic, a very static way of doing all this. I think it's really sad because we don't see all the consequences yet, but I think it's coming. I personally think it's coming in our lifetimes. And I think the way we've been building is stealing from future generations for a long time.
Fascinating. I think we've kind of talked around this a few different points, and I know a little bit about building culture. Just the name itself, I think, describes a little bit about what you're saying. Like, hey, I'm not going to play by someone else's rules, so I'm going to build something else. I'm going to build a different culture. And I think like part of what you do with your work is like informing society and cities like, hey, this is an alternative way to build. This is another way that we can approach building. And one of the kind of phrases that I've heard tagged with this is people first building or people first cities. And you talked about human flourishing a little bit before. Describe for me, what does that mean? Building people first.
Yeah, so I think about how a study last year at the Belonging Institute reported that 74% of Americans report a sense of non-belonging in their own communities. Teens spend on average almost 5 hours a day on social media in the United States. 5 hours a day on social media in the United States. 60% of Americans have chronic health issues. 80% are overweight. there's like 37 million Americans that have diabetes and another 97 million or something from the CDC that have pre-diabetes. So it's something like 138 million Americans have diabetes. I'm just going to use this as one kind of example of the overall health indictment of the health in our country. And then we spent something like $412 billion just on diabetes in 2022, meaning we're going to be well over $1 trillion when actually those 97 other million that have pre-diabetes actually have diabetes. So we've got health outcomes. We've got people that are lonely and depressed. We've got poor physical health. We've got an extreme indebtedness in terms of individuals, once again, and families. And you can look up the statistics, or the $34 trillion of government debt. Municipalities run constant deficits, especially in terms of infrastructure repair. Edmond, one of the most conservative, kind of like fiscally conservative places that, from most standards, manages their budget very well, runs a $30 million infrastructure deficit every year. And that's so normal across the entire country. Houston just, basically, the mayor said they were going broke recently.
Yeah, and that's where TIFs come from and things like that, where the city's like, hey, if you do it, we'll give you tax credits because we can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And so there's so many aspects about the way that we build that affect how people live. And so I think about the built environment, like everything about the built environment is the hardware, and people are the software. And so it's not that if you take your iPhone is a great piece of hardware, but by itself without software, it's meaningless, right? So I'm not saying that the hardware has all the meaning, but you could have a great piece of hardware and then still run crappy software. So it's not like you can build something great and fix everyone's problems. I'm not saying that. But if you have crappy hardware, I can guarantee you cannot run good software. And so when you've got all these things about the built environment that affect how people go about their daily lives, like we've built the same way in certain patterns for thousands of years of human history that has evolved over time. And then starting 100 years ago, we get back from World War II, and then some central planners and some government decided, you know what, we can live differently, detached from differently than we ever have from all of human history. And we're going to take what truly constitutes a neighborhood, a village. We've got our housing, we've got our work, we've got our schools, we've got our church, we've got our civic institutions, we've got our recreation and stuff, all within kind of a context of this kind of organic nature. And then the way cities got bigger is they repeated that. It wasn't they would just grow indefinitely. It was they would grow until maturity, and then they would replicate. And then together, the city is kind of a mosaic of all these complete places. Well, then we said, we're going to take all those ingredients and spread them out over dozens of miles. And so it's like having a pie. You've got eggs and sugar and flour and the filling and all that and butter. Well, all of those go together and can make a pie, but you can also say, okay, just take the eggs and the sugar and the butter and eat those all individually. It's not a pie anymore, even though you're using the exact same ingredients. So the way we design our zoning and stuff, we're using the same ingredients because you have to have the same ingredients to make a city, but we're not making real cities. And kids have no opportunities to go off on their own, to be free-range kids like they used to be, to make plans. Everything has to be planned by mom and dad. Everything has to be driven to by mom and dad. You spend 2 hours a day in your car going to and from work. Everything is an economic transaction. You go through the Scooters drive-thru or the Starbucks drive-thru. It's not this local coffee shop that I walk in and I know the barista. And it sounds like I'm being a little bit idyllic, but I'm not, because I've lived in some of these places. I've lived in Carlton Landing, and there's other cities that have elements of this, where it's not just about consumption and consumer and going to the next big thing. It's about the quality of everyday life and actually living in, I don't mean community as in a commune, because a lot of people think that. I just mean in an area where you're known and and are known. And not everything is an economic transaction, and the people, because the other thing with how we build these giant suburban sprawl is everything gets so centralized. The corporations and the franchises, they win. The schools get bigger. And when you've got like 7,000 people in a school, that's not a place for kids to learn. That's not a place for parents to have a say in their kids' education. I just think so much of it, and I think so much of it comes back to the way we build. Once again, I don't think that fixes it, but I don't think you can fix all these things without fixing the way we build.
So this is actually funny because, I'll let you wanted to say your Truman Show thing, didn't you?
Well, I do. I'll mention this real quick. I was watching the Truman Show last week. It was on TV. And it is like the most idyllic little town. And if you've never seen the movie, basically, he's like in a simulation. Everyone is in on it. Jim Carrey's character basically doesn't realize that everyone is an actor and he's going through life being recorded. And the city is just immaculate. And at one point in the movie, I realized that there's a poster in the background that says Carlton, and it's like a beautiful little like house in the picture, and it's like the place that you're describing, Carlton Landing. If you don't, if the listener hasn't heard of it, just Google Carlton Landing, Oklahoma. It's idyllic. It literally is like the Truman Show, and I didn't know if that was like where Carlton Landing got its name.
It was filmed in Seaside. Seaside was the very first community in the 80s that was kind of built on these principles of traditional labor, the first new community. And so you're totally right. And so Carlton Landing, the designers of Seaside are also the same designers of Carlton Landing.
Oh, look at you. Oh, you pulled out an Easter egg.
Wow, that's wild. And what are the odds that that movie was on like TBS last week?
It's a good connection.
I think an even better connection is the fact that, okay, so let's just talk about necessity. And this is what I love about your concept, Austin, about development, is like, all right, and I know I'm going to get a bunch of people shrugging and highbrowing me on this. Like, how much house do you need? How much land do you need, right? So the argument has been like, why are these lots so small? But in your development's human nature, we've delegated the need to have a huge backyard because we have a massive, huge set of acreage that everybody share. It's like, so I don't have to pay for all of that acreage because it's built into the cost of my community, right? And I see this in these communities, and it's like, man, those lot lines are a little small, and that acreage is small. And it's like, no, we've foregone all of the fluff that we don't need in the structure because now it's built in, not communal like in the cultish sense like you mentioned, but no, it's like you don't have to pay for that because we built it into the entire neighborhood and it spread out the cost of the entire neighborhood, which I love this. And the fact is it encourages get outside. And I went through this last week with Sydney. Yes, I did have surgery last week. We have done more outside of our home than inside of our home, and we have 2,300 square feet. And it's like, we've even been enticed with like, man, we need to get 5,000 square feet. I can afford 6,000 square feet, 7. But it's like, what would we do with it?
Never leave.
Yeah, we would just become basket cases in our own house. And so now we've been more encouraged to be like, no, we're going to push out into the neighborhood, which is awesome because now our exterior improvements have actually caused other neighbors to make their improvements, which now we see like during Halloween and all this stuff. Sorry, I'm getting on a tangent. You need an air horn, Dylan.
I love it.
So no, I love this concept, and so from a developer's perspective, I'm just super pumped about what you're doing, and it's so against the grain. It's actually not against the grain. It's not. And we talked about spreadsheet like developers before. I know for a fact you've gone through the spreadsheets. So, anybody that's pushing against this, what would you say? It's like, no, this has been the outcome that you have seen now with this directive because it's working.
All the successful developers I know that have done this, whether, Seaside or Trilith in Georgia or Carlton Landing or Wheeler District, it's not the fastest way to make money, but it is the way to create the most value. And when you take a long time horizon, it does make money. And so a lot of it comes to this idea of low time preference of, we're in a hurry, we got to have an exit in 5 to 7 years, and getting the kind of investors that are just going to say, yeah, let's invest in something great, and we're going to think on a 20-plus year timeline. And by the way, you can actually reduce the risk a lot, too. It's not like you're just, oh, my gosh, because when you're on a 5 to 7 year exit, everything's got to happen just right. That's a lot of risk. And so I think the successful developers that I know, because I've still been more on the design build side and now just breaking into full-on development, but the people that I'm kind of inspired by is they found investors that buy into the vision, and they're saying, we want to steward this through with you. And so I really think about capital partners as partners, not just, I've been saying this a lot lately, but in the 21st century, or I don't know, 2024, it's really just easy to hate on wealthy people, like especially young people. It's just like, damn, all the people with money. And it's like, that is how society progresses too, is concentrated capital being used productively. I will say that, being used productively, and taking a long-term vision. And so that's what I think about is all this fast and cheap and, really, that's kind of like a cultural thing of like just immediate gratification, and this idea of investing in something to build something better. And that's not just real estate, that's businesses too. That's anything. That's your, you invest now to be healthy later. You invest in your family for a long, happy life. It kind of goes across all the different categories.
Well, that's kind of neat from a perspective, because we have a lot of folks that listen to this and they're, the remodeling contractor, things like that. You took the leap from being a masonry apprentice to now you're a developer. Granted, it took a while, right? We're now in 7 years, but I've seen some of your communities that are coming up. And the cool thing about that is the investors, you kind of get to pick and choose. Also, like, are they local? Do they believe what you believe? And it seems to be working. So I think we could have a whole other segment just on investments and how to attract investors to a vision.
Yeah.
Because your next neighborhood, the Townsend, right? Tell us about the Townsend.
Oh, I'm so excited. So downtown Edmond, for those listening.
And by the way, yeah, speak to the contractors, because this is a cool project.
So there's a lot happening. You can't see a ton yet in downtown Edmond yet, but 5 years ago, there was something like 4 restaurants in downtown Edmond, and now there's 35 plus and counting. There's a 270-unit apartment complex about to open up. There's multiple other multifamily buildings. There's, I think, 4 other kind of like pocket neighborhoods. What I mean by that is 2 to 3 acres of land where whole neighborhoods are going on. And you might be thinking, 2 to 3 acres in a whole neighborhood? How can you put a neighborhood? Isn't that 2 houses?
Yeah.
But when you actually are starting to create urbanism is what I call them. That doesn't mean not privacy. Privacy is extraordinarily important. But when you design things well, it's not just about the buildings themselves. And this is what I mean by urbanism. It's not just about the buildings themselves. It's about the spaces between the buildings and the spaces that those buildings and the hedges and all these other things create, because humans literally like to be in shaped space. The most uncomfortable place for a human to be is just in a wide open field. I forget the psychological term, but when you're in a restaurant, you want to sit by the wall, sit in the perimeter, or things like that. You walk along the edge of the building. You don't walk down the center of the street unless it's very narrow, because it's, evolutionary roots growing up in Savannah and all that.
It's caveman brain kicking in. Which, hold that thought. Have you seen this, Dylan? Did I send you the YouTube video of the Townsend?
Yeah, I've seen it.
And we were talking about rectangles before. And it's all rectangles and squares. And it's like...
Isn't it cool, though?
It's amazing. So, yeah, and I think I found it. If you just search the Townsend, like, building culture on YouTube, it pops up, the animation. Anyway, sorry, I flagged you down. I froze you at the foul line. But
it's just important. I mean, as you're talking about houses. And so on that project, it is only 49,000 square feet of land, so a little bit over an acre. And we've got like 20 townhouses, and those are some live work units, and then also another like 10,000 square feet of commercial buildings.
Yeah.
And all of them, there's like this patchwork of courtyards that you kind of wander through. So if anyone's ever traveled or something, it is more European feeling. And a lot of these houses are 1,200 square feet to 1,600 square feet. We've even got a 3,000 square foot house. And the idea being, most households across the country, across all of the United States, 62% of households are 1 to 2 person households, and 78% are 1 to 3 person households. So we have this idea that like everyone's a big family. It's like, no, there's a lot of people that are 1 and 2 person households. There are a lot of people that are retired and their kids moved out, and they're like, man, I could live in 1,200. I can design a house that's 1,200 square feet. It's got a living, dining, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms upstairs that are great with a walk-in closet and a great master bath and all that. And you can still have your friends over and entertain. And by the way, you're walkable to 35 plus restaurants and bars next to an organic grocery store, next to a park. And you create all these low friction interactions too with community. Like that's kind of what I'm talking with all the touch points. It's not seeing someone every 6 months. It's seeing someone for even a few seconds or 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 5 minutes multiple times a week. And that can create a whole different kind of feel and experience and environment. And so this Townsend neighborhood is mainly townhouses, so a lot of them are attached and things like that. But they're creating all these spaces. And what I would say is they're in the context of another space that is downtown Edmond. It's a center within a center, you could say. And the reason I say that is because so many times we think about suburban subdivisions, and there's nothing wrong with having suburban subdivisions, by the way. It's that everything is suburban subdivisions that's being built, because 96% of Oklahoma City is zoned R1 for literally single-family detached, giant setbacks, all that kind of stuff. Minimum lot sizes, minimum house footprints. I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah. Oh, we were talking about the Townsend.
Yeah, I know. I just forgot where I was going with the. People think of subdivisions and then they think urban living and they think condo or multifamily building because that's really all that's built. It's like we've got these big houses on big lots and then big condo, and it's like going from that to structured parking and elevator. Yeah, that's a really big jump. And I would also say that's not a superhuman scale. There's nothing wrong with condo buildings and multifamily. We need those too. What I'm talking about is urban neighborhoods. They're actually coherent neighborhoods with coherent identities within a more urban environment. And so that's one of the things I'm really passionate about. Creating these little villages.
Well, I'm excited to see it. So
I got to ask, I know that obviously building something that's beautiful is like really important. And anyone that looks up Townsend or any of your work will look at it and be like, wow, that is, I think, objectively beautiful. When you look at some of the things that we've created in the last 100 years in terms of, we'll call it quote unquote buildings, what grinds your gears? Like, is there anything that you're just like, I hate this about modern buildings?
I actually hate the way just like houses, kind of your standard house is designed, and the suburban McMansion is probably the most like annoying thing I could think about because it's not about the budget. It's like I could take the exact same budget, and it probably would be structural masonry or something, okay? But I could take the exact same budget and make that house 3 times as beautiful by not trying to make it look like a freaking palace. Because guess what? It's not a palace, all right? Like, It's not a palace. Not everyone can live in a palace. I can't live in a palace. But, like, that's the whole idea is it's like this trying to make everyone give people the illusion of wealth. It's like every subdivision is branded as luxury. Luxury, this signature, that premium, this. It's like, no, it's not. And, like, by the way, what's wrong with just good? I would be very happy with just good. Like, that's a good house. That's a nice house. So I think that's what really bothers me is trying to make things seem like something they're not. And I think we could build so much better if we just got back to the simple, basic rules of some just basic proportions, good quality materials. Man, we could have a lot more beautiful world just doing that.
that's an incredible way to put it. Now I will look at other structures and be like, is that somebody just trying to flex 70 years ago? Was that just some BDE from some contractor 80 years ago, just trying to be like, yeah, I'm better than Jonesy down the street? And holy shit, yeah, it makes sense now. So that's kind of interesting. And to say the simplicity and being more sustainable in your building, honestly, some of it looks extravagant. And strength is in simplicity, which we've talked about. So, Austin, now the moment. We always ask our guests this. In simplicity, what's the biggest screw up you made in your career that you could at least brag about to help our 5 listeners hopefully not make the same mistake?
Man, I took way too long to get good help, I think, with me, like trying to figure it out on my own. And I hear this a lot from other business owners, but, and also having really bad boundaries and not knowing how to, like, whether that's with clients or employees or something like that.
Yeah, by the way, Austin, our help group around that meets every Tuesday at 11. I'm joking.
Business Owners Anonymous. Yeah.
Being a leader and boss is actually pretty hard, and like going that transition from I'm doing this on my own, and I don't mean I did it on my own because there's so many people that touch at home, right? Like the contractors and vendors, and there's so many people. It also means running the business, was really, I did kind of do it mainly me for a while, and then transitioning to actually having a team. It was rough the first 2 years because I didn't know what I was doing and didn't hire the right people, but it was like, that's my fault. That was on me, totally on me. But once I kind of figured a few things out and I actually found like some great team members and going like, oh, a team. Oh, like what you can do with a team of people. That has been like utterly amazing. And I see a lot of contractors do this because they just kind of work by themselves. And I get it because it's like kind of easier in a way and it's hard to find good help and all that. And granted, if you just want to work by yourself and go show up at a job, do it, you can totally do that and live a good life. You can make a lot of money as a one-man plumber just doing service calls. But if you want to build a business, you've got to start finding people. And if you want to attract the right people, I think that is about you becoming someone new, to actually attract the right kind of people. If you're attracting bad people, you might want to look in the mirror, and that's, I had to look in the mirror on myself and get some confidence too. Like I had to get some confidence.
That's why you got a cane, Dylan.
It does give me authority, I've noticed.
Yeah, don't you dare step out of line. Don't make me use this cane.
That's funny. Well, I got to tell you, Austin, yeah, we've been there. I love to hear this because you've grown so much in the last 7 years, just specifically with your building organization, not just as a human being. But, I mean, we all go through that, so I'm glad to hear that. How do people, like, find you? Because you have such a following. We mentioned about youtube.com/@buildingculture. But you're also on a few different platforms. So where do people find you?
So the Building Culture Instagram, and it's been kind of slow, but late this year we're starting Townsend, which literally is the coolest project we've ever done. It's all the pieces coming together finally. So that we'll start really sharing. Instagram is where we really share a lot of that stuff. So @Building Culture, and then I've kind of split off. And as part of being a team, I used to manage that, kind of speak on that, and now I've got my own channel on, which I'm mainly on Twitter now.
No, we were talking about like recruiting is moving.
Dude, I learned so much. There's millionaires sharing everything they know. Like the Moses Kagan guy that I'm so inspired. There's a whole group of real estate people on there I'm really inspired by. And then, newsletter. That's probably the Building Culture Playbook. That's where I'm actually writing and kind of putting a lot of this philosophy out and starting to put stuff out there.
Yeah, because I'm a subscriber to your newsletter. So how does someone subscribe to your newsletter?
Playbook.buildingculture.com. You could probably Google the Building Culture Playbook and find it.
Yeah, I think I find them like every Monday. Like it hits me, but it's not Monday.
It's every 2 weeks. I've tried to just do it's only every 2 weeks newsletter, so it's not going to eat up your inbox.
Oh man, it's a busy day. Just mark it as read, and then I come back to them like, yeah, that's actually pretty good. So I do read your stuff. I love it. I read your stuff more than I read Dylan's articles that he sends me in prep for the show. It's awful. Hey, but no, Austin, love having you here. You've kind of touched on an area that I think us as contractors need to talk about, which is the development, but also like, what are we building in our communities or repairing? So I'm super pumped that you were here. We'll put all of your information in the show notes, but Dylan, anything else to send us off? You're back, man.
I'm back. It's good to be back. I'll try not to miss our next episode with another flight coming up. But I will say this, Austin, I think what you shared today was super inspiring. And a lot of times we just kind of go through the motions. And like, we're going to build this. We're going to go to our job. It's 8 to 5. And we're just like, oh, I'm going to trudge through. But at the end of the day, it's like, why did we do that? What was our purpose? And you come with a lot of purpose. And I think that's a good point of reflection for all of us.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Kudos to you. Cheers to you, Austin. Cheers, Dylan. Cheers to our listeners. And we'll see you guys next week on Beers with Contractors. Thanks so much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.